What's up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo football podcast, live here from St. John Fisher University, where the Bills just wrapped up a couple hours ago, day 6 of training camp. And it was another very busy day, Ryan. And, one of the top storylines isn't one that I think Bills fans are looking forward to talking about or thinking about the possibilities around this thing. But Maxwell Hairston goes down with a non-contact injury during individual period today. We're going to get into everything we know about that, the potential impact and, short-term and long-term of all of that in a minute. This is the Shout Buffalo Football Podcast, and we're so glad you're joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. Yeah, plenty to talk about, though, and obviously, as you mentioned, first-round pick Max Harrison and everything that happened today is right at the forefront.
Indeed. We are brought to you by Amtrak, which anytime that you want to go on a trip, you should consider in New York State, you should consider setting up your travel through Amtrak, which Empire Service offers frequent departures daily from Niagara Falls, Buffalo, all the way to New York City. Stops include Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, Schenectady, Albany, Hudson, Poughkeepsie. It's a great way to see the state. Get to the Finger Lakes regions, Central New York, the Capital Region, Hudson Valley, and of course the Big Apple, all with Amtrak. No middle seats, plenty of legroom, free Wi-Fi, and no baggage fee. Riding Amtrak is an experience, a fun and relaxing way to get to your destination. And Ryan, it was emotional on the practice field today, as you would imagine when something like this happens, the great unknown of the severity of the Maxwell Hairston injury. It appeared that Nate Bresky, the head athletic trainer, was going through a series of tests on the leg. The good news is, I guess, to try to find some, is that if you see the video, which has been shared by some of our colleagues, Dan Fates in Rochester, John Scott, Carl Jones, when he goes to stand up, he does so on his own power, which is good. He walks at some point on his own power, but it was very gingerly. He was, had to get his arm around Bresky for a part of it. But it's one of those things where you fear the worst, that this could potentially be, a long-term injury. It really takes a lot of air out of the sails at training camp. While the Bills are already dealing with tons of injuries, this is one that it's a little bit different because this is your first round draft pick. You're building a lot of not only the immediate part of the season, but the future here to get him linked up with Christian Benford, who was also very emotional talking about it today. He spent about 20 to 30 seconds after Hairston got up just with his head on his shoulder, Hairston's head on Benford's shoulder, just talking to him. It was just one of those ones where it was deflating.
100% deflating. And to add one more thing, because, again, we don't know the severity of it. It doesn't sound good. They didn't bring the card out for him, which I thought was interesting, too. The fact that he did get up, walk off. A lot of teams, minor, major, you name it, they'll bring the card out if there's a serious concern, and that was not shown in the video that you mentioned. But it's always concerning when you hear the tone in the players' voices, the fact that they went and they had they said a prayer for him, or prayers plural for him. It's something that you never want to see to any player, but Maxwell Harrison being Buffalo's first round pick, even if he didn't win this job out of camp, or the Bills didn't feel like having him start week 1, you felt that at some point this season he would take over that job and start opposite Christian Benford. They had big hopes in it for this player. So to see him go down with what they call kind of like a non-contact type of injury, it's concerning. So now we're all kind of sitting here waiting to see the severity of it, what it is, but obviously never a good sign when you have an injury of that severity.
The early camp returns on Hairston, it's been a big mixed bag, right? Like, depending on who you talk to, some people watching him out on the practice field higher on his performance than others. Dane Jackson, when we talked to him after practice, said it's tough too because this is a young player that he felt like at times was making plays. Bobby Babich earlier in the week talking about, there's good days and bad days, and you're not going to ride the roller coaster with a young player like this, but these are important reps. So no matter the severity of it, you think back to Cole Bishop. I think somebody mentioned this in the comments earlier in the show. He missed a big chunk of training camp, and now, depending on the severity of this thing, you have to wonder if he's going to make it back for any part of training camp, and how much is that going to be a factor into how much he can play this season, if he's even able to play the season, depending on what this injury ends up being.
Yeah, it's injuries put players behind the eight ball, especially young players, rookies, second-year guys. Veterans are a different, take just because they're so familiar with the system. But this certainly looks like it could hamper his rookie season significantly.
If you're watching on YouTube, like I mentioned, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. Right now, we have a brand new Shout swag store. If you want to get a t-shirt, if you want to get a new cap or a coffee mug or a koozie, head over to the link in the description below. If you're watching on any of the platforms or on the audio side, there's a link there as well. Head over to our Shout store right now and get yourself hooked up. One of the things that we have to think about with an injury like this, and I see somebody mentioning Rasul Douglas, who you put up a story about, he doesn't sign with the Miami Dolphins, who extended an offer to him. He's still kind of hanging out there. What are your thoughts on the Bills potentially pursuing him if this is a super serious injury that's going to take Maxwell Hairston out for a while? My first indication is probably not, because I think it's just more of what you already have on the roster in Tre'Davious White and Dane Jackson, two veterans that know this system. I have not been as high on Dorian Strong training camp as some others have seemed to be, but you drafted him for a reason. And this is a guy that I think that if he ends up being CB4 on the boundary behind what would be a starter in Tre'Davious White and a top backup in Dane Jackson, I think that that's something that the Bills would be comfortable with. But again, we haven't seen Dorian Strong in a game setting yet. We've seen him in the practices. He got beat again today for a deep touchdown working against Deon Cain, of all people, the Superman of the Buffalo Bills wide receiver room, who, by the way, is wearing number 32, which is always awkward to look out. To see 32, knowing the OJ history, but also awkward from a receiver perspective. Receivers can't wear 32, Ryan. We have to do something about this. I would have to pull Deon Cain aside and say, what's going on here, buddy? But it was a Mitchell Trubisky bomb, by the way. Yeah. A quick sidestep from the Rasul Douglas conversation to say Mitchell Trubisky every once in a while will throw it back to the North Carolina days and maybe early in Chicago, just air one out. And it was Deon Cain who just absolutely ran past Dorian Strong. Wasn't a good rep for him. But in terms of Rasul Douglas, I don't know how big of a fan I am of the idea, but again, he would be a depth player that's coming in here as competition. I guess it would come down to what does he want? Is he out there looking for the best situation for himself? And would he view the Bills' situation at cornerback as one that maybe he can win a job?
Right. So from the perspective of knowing the playbook and the system, I'm all for it. But as you mentioned, where does he fit into this puzzle? He's not going to most likely beat out Trey White at this point. Trey's having a really good camp. They brought back Trey for a reason where they didn't bring back Rasul Douglas, who I feel like probably could have been had for a decent contract. I know he's still sitting out there now. The longer you're out there, you'd think the more affordable you become. He could leapfrog Dane Jackson. It's all hypotheticals, but then you do have a young player like Dorian Strong. If you're going to go the veteran route and sign a player, is he even the best player to sign? I could make an argument that Stephon Gilmore, who, yes, does not have any knowledge of this current system, played better at his age where he was last year. And he was on a podcast somewhat recently talking about how crazy it would be if everything ended up back in Buffalo all over again. He wasn't against the idea. It's all about what the Bills are looking for in terms of, are you looking for someone to push Trey White? I don't know if Rasul Douglas does that. And I know that sounds crazy because of how low I was on the Trey White signing at the time. I just think he would be more of a depth option further down that line, more with the Dane Jacksons of this team and possibly obviously in front of Dorian Strong as well.
I want to get to some other stuff. I'll save this for later. One former Bills draft pick defensive back with an interception today. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the show. Remind me, make sure we don't finish the episode without talking about this, because I think it's interesting to try to map out what his potential path to not only a roster spot, but maybe even a practice squad spot.
Right.
We'll get into him a little bit later. Let's flip gears here to Joey Bosa, because one of the things that we were getting ready for, and we have a question here from Pops Mafia. So maybe before we get to Joey Bosa, we get to the injury report today. Dalton Kincaid returned to practice today, which I thought was very important. We talked about it yesterday. Like a knee injury already would be something that I think would bring out some panic from fans. To have it be knee soreness for him to come back one day later, that's a pretty big deal. Here's the list of players that didn't practice today. Spencer Brown, Dawson Knox, who is off the NFI list, but he still isn't practicing. Laviska Shenault returned to practice today, so he was participating. Didn't notice him a ton in team drills, though, so they might still be ramping him up slowly, but he went through all the individual stuff, so put him off to the side. Terrell Bernard didn't practice. Elijah Moore, Dorian Williams, Curtis Samuel, Alec Anderson, Tyler Bass dealing with that pelvic soreness, whatever's going on there with him. Dwayne Carter with an illness. Mike Edwards and KJ Hamler with heat-related issues from yesterday. Tyrell Shavers, Caden Prather, Cedric Van Pran Granger, and then it was Cole Bishop who left practice into the medical tent. He ended up coming back at one point, and then Ty Johnson with what looked like a pretty nasty little like foot or ankle injury at the end of practice. It's unclear because it was so close to the end if he came back, but we'll be on the watch out for him. It is just the banged up Bills right now. And shout out to our guy Banged Up Bills over on Twitter. He does all the injury stuff over there. It's truly ringing true right now with this roster.
Yeah, he's staying very busy this summer with this injury list and the amount of guys that are hurt at this point in time. It's a concern for sure. I mean, we're looking at another training camp practice coming up on Thursday, the scrimmage game Friday at the stadium, and then a few more training camp practices. But we're truly not that far away from talking about preseason. And with all these injuries, does it change Buffalo's mindset on how they're going to play their starters, their key depth options, especially some of these players are still out at that time? Buffalo has, they've had a little bit of a string of bad luck. Now, I will say a lot of these injuries do not seem to be on the serious side of things. So I think you'll start seeing players returning in some droves here, a few at a time. Maybe on Thursday, you'll have a few back in it, and Friday, and the list goes on. But it's still worrisome. I mean, you were just naming off those players, and I was sitting here thinking, man, it might be easier to list the players who were out there rather than all those that were injured.
Yeah, and Trace is asking, when will we hear about a Harrison injury update? All of us reporters have asks into the Bills PR department right now, so we're just waiting on word, some type of update. In a world, we definitely could not hear for sure until Thursday, but an update should come at some point when the team knows. And talking to Dane Jackson after practice and then Christian Benford, they were both talking about getting back in there and figuring out the severity of this thing. So the team should probably find out at least the initial type of thing early, sometime today, I would imagine. So that news could come out as early as today, but there's no definitive timeline on when that will, when people will know about it.
Right. And it's the same thing, too, where sometimes news also goes to the Schefters, Rappaports, right, and we might hear through them as well first. But the asks are out there, so now it's just a matter of the waiting game and seeing how long it takes for news to get out.
All right, let's get over to Joey Bosa. I think on the bright side of things, I've been waiting for this day because Joey Bosa is a guy, it's ironically on a day when we're talking about all the injuries, we're going to talk about a really good practice day and the potential that we kind of saw of what this thing could look like with Joey Bosa playing at a high level. And when he goes good on good against Deion Dawkins, I mean, it's got to get Bills fans super excited about the potential of what he can be. In one-on-ones, there was a rep where Dawkins, as good as he is, shuts down Joey Bosa in the early part of his rush. And you're just like, most guys in that moment against Dawkins, we saw it against Javon Solomon a couple practices ago. That usually is the end of the line, right? Bosa has so much in his bag, though. Like, it wasn't even a spin move. It was a quick kind of like, he disarmed himself from Deion Dawkins, quickly kind of used his hands to kind of push Dawkins' hands out of the way and then swam across his body and somehow maneuvered himself inside to get to what would have been the quarterback. And it was like, wow, that is a different level of pass rush than we've seen over the years. I mean, it reminds you of some of the really good reps of Von Miller. Even Greg Rousseau, a different kind of style, but he was dominant today again. Like I thought that, he made a couple plays. He batted down a pass at one point, gave the Dikembe Mutombo finger wag to Josh Allen, having a little fun with him there. But Bosa also had a sack in team drills, working against Dawkins again. Like just the explosiveness and like from a play-to-play perspective to get that kind of production from Joey Bosa has to get you excited, because that's what, to me, if there's a serious injury to Maxwell Hairston here, and, we'll see what this ends up being if he's out for a lot of time. A lot of people are going to ask questions about who can be CB2 and what does that room look like. To me, where things are always going to turn, even if Maxwell Hairston returns, is how good does this defensive line end up being, because that will cure a lot of the problems at the second and third level.
Yeah, if you're getting a consistent pass rush, that ails a lot of your problems on the back end, and that's been a problem for the Bills. Some of it has to do with quarterbacks traditionally getting the ball out quickly against Buffalo, but you watch a game like the Super Bowl and you see the way the Eagles were able to really move Mahomes off of his mark, hit him, cause some turnovers, some errant throws. That's what you want to see out of the Bills in a big game moment. And, Joey Bosa, when healthy, can do just that. He was talking with the NFL Network people a few days ago, and he had a funny quote about, "I'm not washed yet." He knows that he still has a lot of good football left in him. It's just a matter of staying healthy. And I like the way the Bills have kind of brought him along, where Bobby Babich said at his press conference recently, we have a plan in place for Joey. Some days you're going to see him doing more than others. It's about keeping him healthy. So they know that Super Bowls are not won in July and August. You're going to need him December, January, throughout the regular season as well, in those earlier months. And they at least have a plan in place. So he's still showing what he can do at training camp. You've had Greg Rousseau, who's had a few really good days of practice in a row, stacked on top of each other. We've talked about Ed Oliver recently. Guys up front are flashing, especially now that the pads are on, and that's encouraging. We've had young guys, Deion Walker, TJ Sanders, step up at times throughout training camp. And I know today wasn't out there, but Dwayne Carter's had some moments. So there's been a lot of good up front. The good's going to have to be great, though, starting in September.
Just replying to a couple comments here. Thank you so much for watching on YouTube. We really appreciate that. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. Every time we go live, you will get a notification to let you know, so you can come join the party. Add your comments here. Get off my lawn says, crap, another offseason riddled with injuries and Super Bowl season down the drain. Get off my lawn. That's very fitting commentary coming from that handle. But I don't think that the panic button necessarily needs to be pushed yet. The majority, to your point, of these injuries are, ones that probably aren't going to keep guys out into the regular season. And I think to really assess what this is going to look like when they get there, and there's going to be injuries when you get to the season. And when the Bills lost Matt Milano in 2023 in week 5, that really changed a lot for what that team was potentially capable of that season. Right. I've said it so much over the last couple of days, and I'm going to say it again today. Matt Milano looks like the old Matt Milano, which is an absolutely huge addition to this defense. He goes out today, Allen looking for Dalton Kincaid. Milano picks it off. I mean, and he's making plays every single day, and he's making plays with the first team defense, with the pads on. There's a lot of factors that go into this. If you can get, the kind of production that you're hoping for from this defensive front, is it going to stink to not have Maxwell Harrison if this is a potentially season-long injury? Of course. I mean, from a human standpoint, it's awful, right? For a young player that's probably going through this, what it probably means in the locker room for a lot of these guys that have taken him under his wing, like Christian Benford, who was pretty emotional about it today. But I don't think that you necessarily have to hit the season over button for a training camp injury.
No, not at all. And let's put this in perspective, Matt. They didn't have a great pass rush last year, and they were one of the best teams in the AFC. They made it to the championship game. And, oh, by the way, at cornerback, the second corner was not good last year. No offense to Rasul Douglas, but he had a tremendous fall off from where the Bills acquired him in his first season, from the deadline to the end of the year, to where he was last year. The quarterback rating when throwing against him was extremely high. He didn't make any plays on the ball. Seemed to give up a ton of completions. They still have Christian Benford as cornerback one. They still have Taron Johnson as their nickel cornerback. Their pass rush looks on paper to be better. Their linebackers, you've talked about Milano. We've seen a lot of CB2s come in here in the Sean McDermott era. No-name players that you wouldn't necessarily think are going to come in and play big roles, and they have, including Dane Jackson when Trey White went down a few years ago. So they have found ways to make it work on the back end of this defense. It might change their philosophy a bit in terms of maybe wanting to do more man this year versus zone. They might have to shift more into that zone philosophy again, but one injury does not derail a season.
Shout is also brought to you by the National Comedy Center, located in Jamestown, New York. It's the perfect day trip or weekend trip for the entire family. One of the most interactive museums in the country. Ryan Talbot and I went there a few weeks ago, and we absolutely loved it. It's a museum experience like no other, featuring comedy's biggest hits and greatest legends. It's a day filled with laughter. Make sure you get out to the National Comedy Center. There's a lot of weekends left of the summer, so make sure you get out there and have yourself a great day in Jamestown, New York. Let's next move to the wide receiver position. So 5 wide receivers missing in action today. KJ Hamler, Curtis Samuel. I got Caden Prather. Who is the other list? I had it in my story just now. Who are the other 2 that are missing that I'm missing here?
You said Samuel. You said
Elijah Moore and Tyrell Shavers. So 5 wide receivers out for the Bills today, what does that mean, Ryan? Opportunity calls for somebody to kind of find a way to step up. And today, again, for a second straight day, that person is Stephen Gosnell, the former Virginia Tech wide receiver that we talked about yesterday's podcast. Bills are in pads. He's finding a way to make plays. Massive touchdown. He beat Trey White, who had himself a really good day too, and I want to get to Trey in a minute. But he blows by Trey White, who probably was playing some type of zone coverage, but I can't get into that, and I don't know exactly what they're playing. So it was kind of out of position. I've seen that some Bills fans are starting to call him Stephen Goatnell. So that's pretty funny. Interestingly enough, when they were doing one-on-ones or an individual, I can't remember, it looked like he kind of went down with some type of, grab the back of his leg. So you worry about like a hamstring injury, but you wonder if you're a fringe roster guy, if you don't just like work that out and find any way to stay on the field. And he comes back later in practice and makes an absolutely outstanding catch. And Josh Allen it was one of those ones where he really let the air out and really drilled it down the field, and Gosnell runs under it and makes a huge play. So huge play for Stephen Gosnell, who's starting to build momentum. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of the storylines that's captured on Hard Knocks here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, you always look for those camp darlings, the guys that make plays, and this is the second day in a row that Gosnell has just gone out and caught a deep ball that went for a touchdown. Sitting here now on July 29th, if you would have told me Stephen Gosnell would be catching a 70-plus yard touchdown pass from Josh Allen, I probably first would have said, who? Because you probably forget that he's on this roster. But it shows you the opportunities that await you when injuries come up in camp, and making the most of them is so important. So for the second straight day, we're sitting here talking about this UDFA making a huge play. It's going to benefit him, whether that means, making this practice squad or looking across the league. Stranger things have happened. If he continues doing this, he could get picked up by another team and be on a 53-man roster, because there are a lot of rosters that don't have great talent and depth. So we heard from Chris Tabor talking about how he wants people to have really good tape on special teams. I think the Bills want that for all their guys from top to bottom. So if you don't land on this roster, they'd love to have you on the practice squad, but maybe we could also get you to land elsewhere. And HBO Hard Knocks, there's a good chance for a lot of people to have eyes on Gosnell based on his last 2 days.
Sheila Atkins with a great question. If Milano is in Milano form and stays that way, and I imagine stays healthy, do you think he'll be signed again next season if he still wants to play? I mean, at 31 years old, or 31 years old, I believe that he is. He just turned 31. He's probably got, if he could stay healthy this season, at least another season or two that he'll want to play. So I definitely think it's in the cards. To me, if I'm the Bills, it comes down to where are things at with Dorian Williams? How much money do you have to spend? How much money does Matt Milano command if he has a really strong season? Like if you're considering bringing him back, it probably means he had a good run this year and probably puts up the kind of numbers that he did pre-injuries. So do I think that they'd want him in the mix? Without a doubt. He's one of the prime examples of a Bills culture guy that doesn't say a lot, but sets the example and is a leader in the locker room. If they can find a way to get him back on the roster, it kind of reminds me maybe of even that last deal that Jordan Poyer signed. Because even after 1 year in Miami, he's doing a bunch of interviews this offseason about the one team he'd still be willing to not retire for is the Bills. And I don't know if that call is necessarily coming, but he keeps making sure to say it. So I don't think Milano's going to probably want to play anywhere else. So maybe he takes less to come back to Buffalo, even if that ends up being in a backup role behind a Dorian Williams or something like that.
Yeah, if I'm Buffalo, I'm playing it on a year-by-year basis, a 1 year deal here, 1 year deal there. Make most of the money guaranteed because you're not breaking the bank for a 30-plus-year-old Matt Milano in terms of the money for that one season. So do it that way because there could be another team out there that offers him a 2, maybe 3 year deal. And if that's something he's looking for, so be it. But yeah, he's having a great start to this year, this summer, the training camp. So Buffalo would be wise to try to bring him back, even with some of the talent that they have on this team in Dorian Williams. And I know they like some of the depth that they have. Obviously, I think you want to always draft a linebacker, get them into the mix here because you don't know what they view internally as the ceilings for Joe Andreessen and Eddie Ulofoshio. Balen Spector, we've talked a million times about the injury concern. So you still need to address that year in, year out. For all those reasons, why not bring back Matt Milano for another year? And for the question in here from Pops, do you want Milano or Cook? Based on age and the importance to the team at this point in their respective careers, Cook would be my option, but the price would have to be right.
Price would definitely have to be right. And if they do move off of him, if he has a huge year and he does sign a multi-year deal, to your point, and into a couple of comments in here, he would probably factor into the comp formula. And maybe that's the better way to go. Let him go get one more payday. And who knows, maybe he'll be back again down the road. I mean, that's kind of like the whole system that Brandon Beane has built with this group. I want to get to Daquan Hardy next. This is a 6th-round pick from last season, was supposed to be the punt returner. It didn't materialize. He goes into this season as kind of I don't know, maybe somewhere on the roster between 81 and 90 when you're 91, when you're talking about, ranking these guys in terms of best chance to make the roster. I'd have put him in the bottom portion of it because if you think about where he plays in the slot, not only is he behind Taron Johnson, who's an all-pro cornerback, you think about Cam Lewis, Jamarcus Ingram, both of those guys that could play versatile roles and are both probably there above him on the depth chart. And now the Bills go out and draft Jordan Hancock a round earlier than they took Hardy the last year. They brought in Brandon Codrington last year to return punts because Daquan Hardy didn't do enough to win that job. Right. So this is a guy that's completely out of the mix. And really probably having a training camp here to save any kind of chance to remain with this team. And he goes out today. Mike White, who's had a really good training camp, has had a really good couple of practices, picks him off on a ball overthrown, diving catch, sliding catch, if you will, for Daquan Hardy. It's a big-time play. I don't know how many plays he has to make or what he has to do behind closed doors to kind of make the impression that will make him enter the conversation, but you got to start somewhere. And it was a noteworthy play for a guy that I think the organization had high hopes for coming out of Penn State, how competitive he was as a corner even there. Codrington is here, but they don't really factor him into the roster as a cornerback. Hardy was supposed to be a guy that maybe could long-term be the backup to Taron Johnson. It hasn't played out that way.
And that's his path to the roster, showing that he could be, not this year, because I think there's going to be a few people in front of him, that he's worth keeping as maybe the last corner on this roster, or last member of the defensive back room, because he's shown enough growth in that area. And then you have him as that punt return option. Someone in here mentioned, he fair caught a ball inside the 5, and we never really heard from him again. That's very, very true. But there's going to be the growth there. And I love Brandon Codrington and what he brings to this team. But in my initial 53-man roster projection, I put him with the special teams group, and I said, I don't view him even as a cornerback right now. That is a knock on him, and I didn't mean it to be a terrible knock, but he doesn't factor into that cornerback room at all. So can Hardy show enough growth in the cornerback room that you can say we might lose something in that punt return area by keeping him over Codrington, but he can do that, and there's a much higher ceiling for him as a defender, where maybe there is still that path for him in 2 years' time to be that heir apparent in the nickel.
I've thought that Tre'Davious White, on a day where we're sitting here talking about Maxwell Hairston for a good chunk of this podcast, had another really good day. I mean, the one rep that I think stands out above all else was finding himself one-on-one down the left sideline against Josh Palmer, who's had himself a great camp, and he ends up competitively getting back into the play, breaking up the pass. It was a really big-time play when you had a lurking Taylor Rapp back there, but I don't know if he makes his way far enough to impact the ball at the catch point. So if Trey White doesn't run with Josh Palmer on the sideline, it's probably a big-time completion for Josh Allen. The defense had a really nice day. I thought that Trey White was really competitive. He lost a couple of plays, but listen, there's going to be moments where it doesn't go your way. But I thought when he finds a way to make a big play, he still kind of flashes that old Trey at time, which I think has to give you at least some level of confidence with the uncertainty around Harrison.
He's blown me away in terms of my expectations versus what I've seen so far. And I've said this before, my expectations were low, but he's come in here and he has looked for a player that is legitimately competing for a starting job opposite Christian Benford. And obviously waiting on the news of Hairston, it might not be a competition depending on the severity of that injury, but White has answered just about every question this summer in terms of how he looks out there. It's been very encouraging. So kudos to him, having the full offseason without having rehab. He really put a lot into this. He wanted to come back to Buffalo, and the Bills have really benefited from him wanting to be back here.
Final observation that I want to hit before we get out of here. Jacob Bayer, Arkansas State legend, undrafted free agent, probably somebody when you were looking through Ryan Talbot's UDFA tracker a couple of months ago, you probably weren't thinking anything about him, right? Cedric Van Pran Granger listed as the top backup to Connor McGovern, who is probably an extension candidate next offseason, or maybe even sometime this season is your long-term center. But Ryan, this dude blew me away in one-on-ones today. Like so much so with Van Pran Granger out, now it's shifting our focus to start noticing him and maybe watching him a little bit more in team drills. He went one-on-one with Deion Walker and basically stood him up. And this is a mountain of a man.
Yeah.
It's wild to even think about that. And so I think that's a huge development as we kind of move through this thing. If you can get another one of these UDFA interior offensive linemen, Alec Anderson is a guy that kind of, springs to mind as somebody that they've really, Ike Butker before him. Guys over the course of their time, they do a really good job evaluating these guys that don't end up getting drafted, getting them in their program, finding a way to maybe even find a role for them. But Jacob Bayer is a guy that I think people should start paying attention to, and especially when the preseason games start.
Yeah, when you win those matchups, it's something that gets your eye on that player going forward. And now, come preseason here in the very near future, that's a player that's going to play a lot of snaps. So keep your eye on Bayer. Does he hold up well? Does he create running lanes? Does he protect Mike White or Mitch Trubisky, Shane Buechele, wherever they end up putting him in there? He'll probably get a lot of reps with a lot of quarterbacks during the preseason. How does he look? Because they could be onto something with him in terms of a developmental prospect. Put him on the practice squad this year. You don't want to see McGovern, walk away or sign elsewhere at the end of this year. You'd think the Bills are going to want him back. But maybe that's part of the plan is Cedric Van Pran Granger then steps into the starting role. And then you have Bayer as that number 2. Stranger things have happened, Matt. So keep an eye on Bayer. Seems like he's putting together some good practices, doing well in these one-on-ones. Another UDFA to watch.
All right, so everybody brace yourselves. This will be my last Shout podcast until Sunday. We're taking a little trip. Every year my son's birthday is on July 31st, and every year I miss it or get there late or come back after practice. And I could probably say this because he's at camp right now, so he won't be watching this live. Plus he doesn't watch most shows, so we'll probably be in the clear. We decided this year, so he's a huge Harry Potter fan, and we always go down to Florida. We go to Disney, and his birthday is actually July 31st, which is the same as Harry Potter. It's just kind of like crazy random. And obviously Universal just opened another level to their Harry Potter world there with the Epic Universe. And so we decided this year, like, as he's still in the thick of like the Harry Potter fandom, like, we got to go down to Universal, and it would be so special to do it on his birthday. So we're doing it. We leave tomorrow morning. I'll be back Saturday. I'll be back at practice on Sunday. But because I have such amazing teammates at Syracuse.com, Ryan's going to have me covered. And then Brent Axe from Syracuse.com, the Axeman, longtime covering the Syracuse sports scene, and spent a few years covering the Bills as well. He is going to tag in for me, and he will be on the podcast with Ryan on Thursday for practice, and then the red and blue game on Friday. So apologies. Not ideal timing, but we're going to get down there and try to give my son a really cool birthday.
Yeah, it's awesome. Matt's son and Harry Potter also share a birthday with my wife. We're not going anywhere extravagant. I might be sleeping on the couch as I'm covering Bill's practice on her birthday, but it's gonna, we're gonna all make the most of this experience.
Yeah. My bad. Shout out and sending love to Joelle. You are a peach for putting up with me and us and
me.
Yeah, all of it. Become an insider, because Ryan and Brent will have you covered over the next couple of days, and I'll tag back in on Sunday, and we'll get back after it. 716-528-6727. And then it is a 2-week free trial, $3.99 a month after that. For Ryan Talbot, I am Matt Parrino. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe on YouTube. We'll see you soon, everybody. Take care.